Hello and welcome to Issues, a show that explores many issues and topics affecting Wilmington and you, the people who live and work here. I'm your host, John Rago. And on today's show, the issue is gun ownership or the possession of guns. Now, we know that owning a firearm is a right for most Americans, and today we want to focus our discussion on the impact and responsibilities of owning a gun. We'll also take a look at the role of illegal guns in our society today and what attempts are being made to make our community safer. Joining me is the police chief for Newcastle County, Colonel Elmer, the head of the Wilmington Housing Authority. Actually, he's the executive director of the Wilmington Housing Authority, Fred Purnell, and Thomas Shellenberger, a Wilmington-based attorney who also serves as the public information officer for the Delaware State Sportsman Association. Thank you all for being with us and joining us on the show. Let's start with just general responsibility for people and guns. Chief, let me turn to you. You see it all. Am I right or wrong in assuming that most of what you see out there in terms of bad things that happen with guns and people who control the guns is because they're illegal ownership or illegal guns?
That's correct. What you're really seeing here is the legislators are taking a fair swing at gun control. Mm-hmm. They've made some good laws in an attempt to control persons that are prohibited from having guns or getting access to guns. Those are good, solid laws. The back door is open and no one's watching. They're not paying attention. Where are criminals getting guns? When you go into a burglary, it's considered a property crime. And typically property crime is considered a nuisance crime. It's not taken seriously on so many levels. And often even a judge himself will put a burglar out on unfunded probation or whatever.
Release.
He goes right back to doing burglaries because he's addicted to opiates. So he's stealing guns from homes. Guns are at a premium on the street. He's giving them or selling them to criminals or trading them for opiates, heroin in particular, and the guns are out there. So there is no gun control in that regard. Again, the laws for gun control are well-meaning and well-written, but they're affecting the normal average citizen who just wants to possess, or he is a sportsman, such as myself. I was just shooting with my brothers at our range not too long ago. I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment. It has nothing to do with that. Right. What I'm saying is if we're going to continue to look at property crime as a nuisance crime, we're going to continue to put hundreds of guns on the street every year. 40 burglaries last year included, all 40 of those burglaries were all burglaries where guns were taken. Okay. And if we're going in front of a judge saying this guy is being charged with theft of a firearm during a burglary, but that's considered a nuisance crime, he's going to be put out on bond. Mm-hmm. And because he's addicted to heroin, he's going to go right back to doing burglaries. Very vicious circle. Yeah. At some point, we're going to have to focus on the real problem. Again, the addiction problems. Are we rehabbing people? Is prison rehabbing people? Mm-hmm. And are we focused on treating property crime for real? We are. Mm-hmm. Every time we go out there looking for these guys that are doing these property crimes, we bring them in. We think we're bringing them to justice. Mm-hmm. And because it's just a burglary or just 25 burglaries, they're getting out on bond.
Yeah. Okay. So the whole issue of this word control, it's what we're trying to control here. It's not so much guns as it is the behavior of people and this vicious cycle: guns, drugs, gangs. I mean, it affects most urban areas. And then the thing that I know is of concern with you is you're out here in this area of Newcastle County, and I can remember years ago it was a clear delineation of suburban and urban. Sure. And now, all the lines are blurred, and we've got things happening out in Newcastle County that used to be the exclusive trade, if you will, for the city of Wilmington. All right, that's very interesting. Let's talk about control and what we do here.
Well, I think that if you look at what Richmond's experience is they went after the firearm problems they were having in that city with federal money and federalized the problem, took the people off the street under the federal laws, which exist obviously throughout the nation, and that project cut their violent crime way down because they were taking people and not turning them loose, but sending them to federal prison, which is usually out of state, away from friends and family, and prisoners don't want to go there.
Yeah. Is that similar to our Fed Up that we had here? We had the Fed Up program that would actually take people away from this setting. Is it?
The problem is it's got to be focused and it's got to be continual. It can't be a short-term effort. And that's the problem, that criminals know that if they do that burglary, and they're not going to pick up the burglary charge, they're going to pick up a federal person prohibited charge and do federal time, mandatory for that. 3 years is the mandatory penalty for that. And they're not going to do it at Gander Hill or at the Delaware Correctional Center in Smyrna. They're going to be sent to Wisconsin or someplace like that.
Away from their families.
Which is the federal system. They move people around all over the country, and people don't like that. So that is one of the Project Exile that happened in Richmond, Virginia in the early 2000s was very effective. There's a problem with all of this, and the Colonel certainly can speak to it. And I can speak to it being, I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I'm in and out of the court system. There's not enough resources to lock up everybody who want to lock up. There just aren't enough jail cells, so they have to pick the worst of the worst. Federalizing some of this through the U.S. Attorney's Office is a step that's worked in other jurisdictions. What's interesting about the gun control issue is that the less it works, the more people demand it. And if you look at a city like Camden, New Jersey, which has a murder rate approaching 40 times the national average, and some of the strictest gun control in the country, the problem is somebody who will kill you over looking at you wrong or selling dope on the wrong corner doesn't care that they're getting an illegal gun to do it. It doesn't matter. They're criminals. And you're only going to impact the law-abiding gun owners. To deal with some of the issues that the Colonel mentioned, I think education is important. Facilitating and training people that safe storage of firearms. If guns are in a safe, if they're not, no safe is burglar proof, but burglar alarms, dogs, and safes are all something that slows a burglar down, and that's really all that a homeowner can hope for, is to make your house less attractive. Because homeowners do have a responsibility to make sure that their firearms are stored safely.
Now you mentioned in your comments, and so did the chief, the societal issues we're dealing with here. Okay, look, certain beliefs and standards have all gone to hell in some respects in terms of communities and families, and like you just said, Tom, somebody who's going to grab a gun and hurt you, I mean, they don't really care about a lot of other things. They've already made that choice. Now that brings me over to Fred Purnell as the head of the Wilmington Housing Authority. The facilities that you manage are societal issues. These are in some cases small little cities, municipalities, if you will, buildings with lots of people. So you tried to do something which was, and obviously you tried to do that for a reason. You were trying to limit the carrying of weapons in certain parts of your facilities, right?
Well, for the most part, and it's funny, we said this wasn't going to be a discussion about control, but my responsibility is to manage property. We're first and foremost property managers. So basically our attempt was to put a policy in place that allowed us to manage behavior relative to firearms that would also give us some knowledge that we were providing a safer, as mandated by HUD, safe environment. The interesting thing about the nexus for this whole thing is that we did initially have an outright prohibition on firearms, as did most housing authorities across the country. And it's interesting because no one really can put their finger on where that came from. When that was challenged, we changed the firearm policy to basically more of a management policy. If you legally could own a firearm, you were allowed to, but we focused primarily on the common areas, transporting the gun, safe storage, as was already alluded to. And those things were also challenged. At the end of the day, the ruling basically extended the domicile. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to try to be, but basically the notion of the apartment, the common areas of the building, as being part of your
home.
Your home.
Yeah.
And so we then have to abide by that ruling.
Yeah.
We can't manage pretty much the way that a gun is carried in and out of our properties, or can't even ask really if one exists.
Now see, I didn't want to get into necessarily this discussion, but I'm going to turn to Tom for a moment, because obviously the reason why you couldn't do what you thought you needed to do for management purposes, and by the way, the state Supreme Court overturned, and essentially that's the last word on this. I believe it's dead now, the whole issue. But why would, for instance, the NRA or any organization why would you oppose something like this if just let me leave it that way. Why?
Well, a wide variety of organizations were involved in the Doe versus
Yeah.
Wilmington Housing Authority case, including law enforcement officers from some retired law enforcement officers, Pink Pistols, which is a group of gay and lesbian firearms owners. Francis Pileggi was the lead attorney in that matter and would certainly be better able to speak to it, though I did represent one of the amici in that case.
Right.
The ruling there dealt with the Delaware State Constitution, Article 1, Section 20, which the Delaware Supreme Court found was broader and granted more protection than the Second Amendment of the United States. So they are the final arbiter of what Article 1, Section 20 means, and that section recognizes 12 individual rights with respect to firearms.
Yeah.
And protection of your home, protection of yourself and family are three among them. And what they said was that if the state, which they viewed the Wilmington Housing Authority as a state organization, was going to infringe on that right, they had to have a substantial reason to do that. It couldn't just be arbitrary. And they said it had to be something that was closely tailored to the goal and not something overly broad, which was the real question. Because the issue wasn't whether I can twirl my handgun in the common areas. It's whether, for example, I as a person who lives in public housing, I don't, but if I did and had a concealed carry permit, I'd be able to carry my gun to the laundry room if I was doing laundry at night where I might be a crime victim.
Right.
That was prohibited.
Yeah.
Even though my gun was concealed, nobody would see it, nobody would be frightened, alarmed by it. And I was being denied simply because I'm meet the residency requirements.
And you had that gun because of personal protection. That was the choice you made,
Authorized
and
under
it wouldn't be
Delaware
allowed. So, all right, what does Fred do now for, again, management purposes? He obviously, WHA just didn't wake up one morning and say, hey, let's prohibit people from carrying their guns. Obviously, there were some concerns in the housing facilities. What can you do now? Education on safe use of firearms? What do you do to prevent any problems in the housing facilities?
Well, I think it's interesting that's what I heard Fred say was he's not sure where the prohibition came from. It doesn't sound like it was so much the response to a considered opinion. It sounds like something that more or less came down from HUD many years back. What do? You control you outlaw dangerous conduct, not mere possession of something that's a constitutionally protected right. I think having offering, and I'd love to see the Newcastle County Police or the Delaware State Police or the Wilmington Police get involved in the Eddie Eagle program through the NRA, which teaches young children what to do if they see a gun. And it's not a propaganda piece for gun ownership. It's stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. Those are the only 4 things that are involved in the program. Not guns are good or bad.
What is it called? Eddie Eagle?
Eddie Eagle. And there is a trained, usually a police officer, wearing the costume funded by the NRA to go out and learn those steps for children. Because I've been involved with youth organizations. I'm a parent of young children and involved in youth organizations and was a member of a very important youth organization in Delaware for 18 years. And there were cases where, for example, a gun was found on the grounds of the Boys and Girls Club in the Newcastle area. I think that training was something that ought to be offered to every child in Delaware.
Yeah.
Because that's what every child should do if they see a gun.
Well, I'll tell you, just yesterday or just earlier today on the taping of the show, and I know this is going to be delayed for some folks to see this, but there's a 15-year-old young man who had a gun over at Moyer Academy here in the city. I know we all worry, we're going to have to take a break here, but I know we all worry about the same thing, which is there don't seem to be any limits anymore. I mean, we're not limited by age or neighborhood or anything, a geographic area of the city or county, when it comes to these guns finding their way into the hands of people who are not responsible. They don't own, by the way, they don't own the gun. See, I refuse to say that a person who has an illegal gun owns a gun. They don't. They just happen to have possession of one, which is why we called this program Ownership and Possession, Gun Possession. All right, I'll stop pontificating. We'll take a short break and we'll come right back on issues. Thanks so much for being with us. now with issues here at WITN, and we thank you so much for being with us on the program today. If you're just joining us, we're talking about gun possession, gun ownership. You know, I'm going to make a confession here and then get you to react to it. You know, I'm a person who, a number of years ago, if you asked me about guns, I would say that's fine. I appreciate those who want to own guns and are professional police officers who have that as their line of work. But, you know, I'm just afraid of them. And now I've become concerned enough about what's happening around me, not just in Wilmington. I want to make that very clear. Not just talking about in Wilmington, just generally in society today, that I've actually started looking at you know, possibly owning a gun. So, what should I mean, is that smart, Chief, for me to
You know,
to think that way?
Well, you know, it comes with such great responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
If a legal citizen, you know, is willing to accept the responsibility and the accountability that goes with owning a gun, which also goes along with the folks that put in for a CCDW. You know, oftentimes they think they're more safe if they're carrying a concealed deadly weapon. You may be, you may not be, but you may be putting yourself in a situation where you don't understand the amount of accountability you have. When a police officer gets into a police shooting, we are investigated at 3 different levels: internally as a police department, criminally as a police department, like it or not, you're investigated criminally, and then criminally once more by the Attorney General's office. We have to be cleared on 3 different levels if we pull that trigger.
Yeah.
We have a vast amount of training in that regard. We understand when we pull that trigger exactly what we're going to face if trigger is pulled. That doesn't usually translate to someone out there that says, I think I need a gun for protection. Now, if they're being smart and they're following, you know, good protocols and good training, you know, again, I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment. I own guns. I've owned guns even before I became a police officer. I served in the military prior to becoming a police officer. I think there's a place, and I think there's a certain, there are folks that have an affinity for it. But to just go out willy-nilly and say, I'll be more safe if I buy a gun. No, not necessarily, not my opinion.
Well, now, what if I wanted to do that, or if anyone's watching who wants to do that, do I have to go through any training?
There's quite a few levels. The first levels that you're going through isn't just training, but it's just to see if you can even purchase a weapon as a citizen.
Oh yeah, the
you
background
may not
checks.
meet the criteria.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And
But is
beyond
actual
that-
training, is actual, you're not trained in like circumstances like the police are in the use of weapons.
You are if you're applying for the Colonel mentioned a concealed deadly weapons license.
Oh,
To carry
okay.
a concealed deadly weapon, training is mandatory
All right.
under most circumstances.
Okay.
Retired police officers are excluded because they're required to qualify, but they have a special program. And there is, I believe, a provision for people who are applying on emergency basics who are victims of domestic violence who can get a permit faster than somebody not in those circumstances. And I'm not sure about that. I haven't looked at that law recently. But the average citizen applying has to go through a complete background check,
Yes.
fingerprints, et cetera, and must pass the state mandated training requirement, which isn't, you know, sit down and watch a video. It's
Right.
several hours of training. And you're absolutely right that it's not the same level of training that a police officer gets on a routine basis. But I would say that the average person that I've met who carries a concealed deadly weapon is well aware. It's something that's emphasized certainly through the NRA, through the state agencies, and if you read the internet chat rooms that discuss this topic, you're going to be, if nothing else, sued. And you better be well aware of what your state laws are, the circumstances under which you're allowed to use deadly force, because that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, because just as much as we're concerned about the illegal weapons being used, or the people who have obtained weapons illegally, we ought to be concerned about, I mean, there's a proliferation of folks choosing to do maybe what I'm thinking about doing, which is getting a weapon. I think we've got to be concerned about that also. Look, all of this makes life tough for all of you. On a daily basis out there on the streets of Newcastle County, or even some of your officers with us here in the city of Wilmington, you as a person who represents an organization which advocates for certain things, and you as the manager of this facility, I mean, you tried something, but it didn't work. So what do we do? how do we make life easier for everybody? What do we do? What can we do?
Well, I don't think that everyone should go out and buy a gun willy-nilly.
Okay.
I absolutely agree with the Colonel that owning a firearm is a responsibility. And even though to purchase a firearm and have it in your home for self-defense and not carry it concealed, you don't need special training. I would strongly recommend that people get it because they should know how to safely store it, how to safely utilize it, break it down and clean it, and under what circumstances a firearm can be used in self-defense. What's often overlooked is, well, I guess two factors that are important. I think the Colonel will tell you, and I don't want to speak for him, that law-abiding, trained, concealed deadly weapons holders aren't a huge problem with crime in Delaware. They're just not. They're law-abiding people for the most part.
I'll go a step further. Even the folks that choose to open carry. We have very few problems with them. The only time you even have a problem with open carry, because again, these are typically they're honest legal citizens that prefer to exercise their right of the Second Amendment. And open carry is only a problem when you're in a court building that says you can't bring it in here. And the folks that want to open carry, we respect that as an agency. We have special training for it. What to do when you walk up to someone, in the BJ's parking lot with a .45 on their hip. They're not in trouble. They're not wrong. But if it's causing concern of the folks around them, we do have the right to talk to them and see what's going on and make sure that they are following, the law. But you can't go walking into a council meeting with a gun on.
Yeah, right. And again, it comes back to personal responsibility, your actions when you take on this responsibility of carrying a weapon on your person.
But I'll take from what you said that those folks are not the problem. I'm going to agree with Tom. The problem is the people that have obtained the weapons illegally. Yeah. We have all these laws with tremendous teeth. But the truth is, the laws that we need to have teeth in is you've stolen a firearm from someone's house, which is, again, I want to remind you, that's looked at as a nuisance, a property crime.
I didn't know that.
And that's bad because we're going to trade the gun for drugs. In most cases, lion's share of the time, these people are hopelessly addicted to heroin. No one likes to talk about the fact that we're in the middle of a heroin epidemic. Here we are talking about guns, but how does someone get a gun illegally? I'm hopelessly addicted to heroin. I break into a house. I find guns. I consider that like hitting the lottery because I know I'm going to sell that gun at a premium or just trade it at a premium. And once that gun is out there, now you have an illegal firearm in the hands of someone who doesn't have any training, who doesn't have any conscience, who doesn't care, and that's where the problem lies. For us, we're investigating criminals with guns. We rarely run across someone who is a legal citizen with the right to carry. Every once in a blue moon that occurs, maybe in a domestic situation where a guy is at the end of his rope or a wife is at the end of her rope and they choose to take a very fatal course. That's unusual.
Well, now we've mentioned two things on this program. One is the Richmond model that you referenced earlier in the program, whereby folks who do illegal activity with guns go under the federal jurisdiction, which makes life tougher for them and their families. Now, you just mentioned the burglary situation where, in terms of what people are charged with.
Yes.
So it seems to me like in this show alone, we've talked about two things that could possibly be done, but they shouldn't fall under the label of gun control. We're talking about the responsibility of people who either have guns legally or illegally, right?
What we're really talking about is how to react to people who misuse firearms.
Yeah,
That's really the question.
That's what I'm saying. We have to refocus ourselves. And I know there's people out there that think we'll just collect up to 300 million guns that exist in the United States and we'll be fine. Yeah. That's not the answer. We have to preserve our rights. The answer is what Tom said. We have to go after the people that are doing the wrong thing. And all these laws are built to hamstring, well, some of the laws are built to hamstring, legal folks that want to have weapons. Right. I think you accept the responsibility of keeping those weapons out of someone who's mentally challenged hands. It's a difficult task. But the knee-jerk reaction to Sandy Hook and all those types of things isn't always the answer. But the president, our Senate, they have obligations. They're doing the best they can. Right. But I think if we just look at the model we built and reanalyze where the back door is, which is steal the guns from someone's home, I'm not going to get in big trouble for doing a burglary. But if you change those laws so that the people that are stealing firearms out of someone's houses are doing federal time, you'll change you will have gun control. You'll
Okay.
finally have what you keep talking
Right.
about.
Now,
gun
why
control.
is no one paying attention to this approach? Or does it have any traction?
Well, my guess is Fred is probably, well, actually both Fred and the Colonel are more familiar with state and federal budgets than I am.
Yeah.
But that's the real question, is the money it costs to lock all these folks up.
Okay.
Because I certainly suspect that the judges, we've come up with special drug court because recognizing that drugs are a huge problem
Yeah.
in this country. But getting the people off the street, getting them treatment, and getting them cleaned up is a very difficult, expensive process. And does the state of Delaware, does the federal government have the will and the resources necessary to do what we're talking about, which is lock these folks up? Because the criminals aren't stupid. I used to work for the Bureau of Juvenile Corrections when there was one, back when Ferris had a population of about 200 kids. It's one of the ways I worked my way through law school. And I would talk to the kids, and what you want in a burglary is, 1 is cash, 2 is drugs, and 3 is firearms. Those are the top 3 things. And televisions are worthless now.
Yeah, really.
They're too big to carry, and
Yeah, the rule is take what you can carry.
Yeah.
and you want those are the top 3 things back when I was more involved with the system. And it was very interesting to talk to them because none of them felt that they didn't care a fig about gun control laws.
Yeah.
That was exactly what you're talking about. Hey, this is one of the top 3 things I'm looking for when I go into the house.
Yeah.
And they were also very impulsive and not thinking of long-term consequences. They don't really recognize other people as real. Their family is very real and real people that have feelings, and the rest of us are just out there.
Yeah. I worked in the department that managed Fair School for a number of years, and I'll never forget the day when I had a chance to talk to a young guy who was in there because of illegal possession of a weapon. And I asked this what I thought was a simple question. Do you realize that what you did was wrong? And he said, no, not really. And just that little inner thing that we all have that tells us right and wrong, or that gets our conscience operating in terms of what we should and shouldn't do. A lot of the young people and folks out there in general don't have that today.
It really
and you
is.
probably see it.
Well, and that's one of the difficulties we have. I mean, one of the things that came out of this effort, and I think there was some good and bad that came out of it for us, but really is what are the next steps? Because of budget constraints, like we don't have full-time security in all of our buildings and things like that. So just like the chief said, if someone comes to one of our facilities openly carrying a gun, we would probably not say anything because we're not allowed to ask for the permit. If it's a resident, we definitely wouldn't say anything. But even a visitor, one of the things we've got to incorporate into our day-to-day operations is how do we handle those instances, as rare as they may be, where that happens, because we're not 100% sure what we should do right now.
Listen, I gotta stop. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and time flies by. Look, thank you very much for this discussion. And again, I'm glad we focused more on personal responsibility, what you need, some of the things you need to do if you are considering, obtaining a weapon for yourself legally, and then some of the things maybe that we could do to sort of correct the mess we've got out there. Again, the mess caused not by guns, but by the people who do things with guns. So, but thank you all. I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you, John.
And that is all the time we have for today's program. I want to thank our guests very much for joining us. Now, we hope this show has been informative. If you have any thoughts on this discussion, please tweet them at WITN22WILM, #issues22, or post your comments on this video's YouTube page. For WITN22 in the city of Wilmington, I'm John Rago, and thanks so much for watching.